I stood at the edge of what was supposed to be my land and stared at a locked iron gate I had never seen before. Bold white letters were bolted across it. Private HOA community, no trespassing. For a second, I honestly thought I had the wrong address. But the old oak tree was still there. The dirt road I memorized years ago still curved the same way. This was my land. Before I could take another step, a security guard rushed over, hand hovering near his radio. "Sir, you can't be here," he said sharply. "This is HOA property." I laughed, quietly. "I own this land." He didn't laugh back. Instead, he called someone. Minutes later, a well-dressed woman stormed toward me, heels clicking like she already knew she'd won. Neighbors slowed their cars. Phones came out. "You disappeared for 2 years," she said loudly. This land was abandoned. Abandoned. I looked past her, and that's when my stomach dropped. Rows of houses. Fresh pavement. Streetlights. An entire society, built where my land used to breathe. She folded her arms and smiled. "This community doesn't belong to you anymore." That was the moment I realized something terrifying. They didn't just take my land. They erased me. And they truly believed I would never come back. Before we continue, drop your country or city in the comments so we know how far this story reaches. And if you believe truth always wins, like, subscribe, and stay with me. I bought that land years before any gates, bylaws, or HOA presidents ever existed. Back then, it was quiet, just open space, dirt roads, and long mornings where the wind moved through the grass without permission from anyone. I didn't buy it to flip or sell. I bought it to build something lasting. A home. A future. Maybe even something I could pass down one day. Life, however, had other plans. 2 years earlier, I had to leave. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Work took me overseas, and family obligations followed. I locked everything properly, paid my taxes, kept every document in order, and trusted that land ownership still meant something in this country. I never received a single notice. No letters. No warnings. No legal challenges. Nothing. While I was gone, the area changed. What started as a few nearby homes slowly turned into construction noise. Then paved roads. Then signs. By the time I returned, an entire community had risen around and over my property. A homeowners association had formed, complete with rules, officers, and a president who spoke like authority itself lived in her clipboard. They didn't ask. They didn't notify. They didn't purchase. They just assumed. Standing there that day, blocked from my own land, I realized something chilling. While I was gone, they hadn't just built houses. They had rewritten the story, one where I was the problem, and they were the rightful owners. And they were confident no one would ever challenge it. The first thing I did after that confrontation was try to stay calm. Anger would have been easy, but useless. I needed answers. So the very next morning, I walked straight into the HOA office, documents in hand, expecting confusion, maybe even an apology. What I got was arrogance. The receptionist barely looked up before telling me I needed an appointment. When I explained who I was and why I was there, her expression didn't change. She made a call, whispered for a moment, then pointed me toward a conference room like I was being escorted, not welcomed. The HOA president walked in with a stack of papers and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She slid a glossy map across the table. Bright lines. Clean labels. "According to our records," she said, tapping the page, "this land has been HOA property for over a year." I pulled out my deed. She didn't even glance at it. Instead, she leaned back and said the word that would become their favorite excuse, abandoned. She claimed I had vanished. That no one had seen me. That the land had been unused. That under HOA bylaws, and something she vaguely referred to as county allowance, they had the right to absorb it for development. When I asked for proof, she handed me bylaws, not ownership documents. That's when I realized this wasn't confusion. It was strategy. I went to the county records office next. That visit raised even more red flags. My land was still listed under my name. Taxes were paid. No transfer. No lien. No sale. Yet somehow, permits had been issued. Roads approved. Utilities installed. Someone had signed off on things that should have been impossible. When I brought that back to the HOA, the tone shifted. The president stopped smiling. She told me I was trespassing. Said I was causing disturbances. Said neighbors felt unsafe. By the end of the week, a "No trespassing" HOA property sign appeared right where my old boundary marker used to be. Then the police showed up. Not with handcuffs, but with warnings. They told me the HOA had complained. That I needed to stay away until ownership was resolved. Neighbors watched from their porches. Phones came out again. Whispers followed me everywhere. The HOA didn't just want my land. They wanted control of the narrative. They told residents I was a squatter. That I'd appeared out of nowhere. That the real owner had disappeared years ago. Some even said they'd been told I was trying to scam the community. Every time I tried to speak up, the HOA shut it down. Meetings were closed. Emails ignored. Questions deflected. Finally, during one heated exchange, the HOA president crossed her arms and delivered the line she thought ended everything. "If you think you own this land," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "then meet us in court." She smiled like the outcome was already decided. That's when I stopped arguing and started preparing for war. Filing the lawsuit felt surreal, not because I doubted my ownership, but because of how confident the HOA was that I would lose. They acted like the courtroom already belonged to them. They hired an expensive legal team. Polished suits. Thick binders. A lawyer who spoke in calm, rehearsed sentences, like this wasn't about land at all, just paperwork that happened to be in their favor. Meanwhile, I walked in alone, carrying a folder worn at the edges from years of careful keeping. The first hearing set the tone. The HOA's lawyer opened by calling my absence extended and unexplained. He argued abandonment. Claimed the land had been reclaimed for community use. He even suggested I'd neglected my responsibilities as an owner, despite never missing a tax payment. The HOA president sat behind him, confident. Smiling. Occasionally shaking her head as if I were wasting everyone's time. When it was my turn to speak, I stayed calm. I didn't argue emotionally. I presented facts. Dates. Records. Receipts. The judge listened, but didn't react. Neutral. Measured. Almost distant. That worried me more than hostility would have. As the weeks went on, the conflict deepened. The HOA submitted maps showing their community boundaries conveniently swallowing my land. They presented bylaws that magically expanded their authority. They claimed county approval again and again, even though they never produced a signed transfer of ownership. I noticed something unsettling. Every document they showed looked official, but none of them actually proved ownership. Still, they spoke with certainty. They tried to paint me as reckless. As someone who showed up years later trying to disrupt families and homes. They brought residents to testify, people who had bought houses in good faith and were now terrified they might lose them. That part hurt. Not because it weakened my case, but because the HOA had put innocent people in the middle of their deception. The pressure was relentless. Outside the courtroom, whispers followed me. Inside, the HOA lawyer subtly suggested I settle. Compromise, he called it. He hinted that fighting further could be expensive. Exhausting. Risky. They expected me to fold. Instead, I kept submitting evidence. Every tax record. Every deed copy. Every boundary survey. Every piece of communication showing I was never notified, never warned, never legally challenged before construction began. Then came the moment when things escalated beyond legal arguments. During one hearing, the judge asked a simple question. Who authorized the permits for this development? The HOA lawyer answered smoothly, but too quickly. He named a county office. I saw the judge pause. That answer triggered something. The court requested verification. A county official was subpoenaed. Suddenly, the confident rhythm of the HOA's case began to stutter. Emails were reviewed. Permit timelines examined. Approval stamps compared. That's when inconsistencies started surfacing. Dates didn't line up. Boundaries shifted between documents. Signatures appeared where they shouldn't have. The HOA lawyer objected repeatedly. The judge overruled. Tension filled the courtroom. For the first time, the HOA president stopped smiling. As the conflict reached its peak, the HOA made their boldest move. They doubled down. They argued that even if ownership was disputed, the community had invested too much to reverse course. Roads, utilities, homes, families. They asked the court to consider practical reality over legal technicalities. That argument was dangerous. Because if it worked, it would mean power could override ownership. I watched the judge lean back, hands folded, eyes narrowing slightly. No expression. Just focus. When it was finally my turn again, I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, I never sold my land. I never transferred it. I never abandoned it. And no one ever had permission to build on it. The courtroom went quiet. The conflict wasn't just between me and the HOA anymore. It was between truth and convenience. Between law and entitlement. And everyone in that room could feel it approaching the breaking point. Whatever happened next would change everything. The twist didn't come quietly. It hit like a thunderclap in a courtroom that had been tense for weeks. After the last round of hearings, the judge requested verification of every single permit, deed, and county record the HOA had presented. They had confidently submitted maps, bylaws, and statements claiming ownership, but now the cracks were showing. What had once been a wall of authority was starting to crumble. The first bombshell came from the county official. Sitting under oath, the clerk's voice was steady but firm. None of these permits were authorized for the HOA. These documents are marked in our system as invalid. The land parcels still belong to the original owner. I felt a jolt of disbelief, but also relief. This was the proof I had been waiting for. The judge paused, eyes scanning the room. Even the HOA lawyer's usual calm faltered for a second. He tried to object, but the judge cut him off. Objection overruled. The record speaks for itself. Then I presented the evidence that sealed the twist. Original deed in my name, notarized and filed. 2 years of tax payments with matching receipts. Boundary surveys confirming the exact land they claimed as theirs. County correspondence showing no transfer of ownership had ever occurred. The courtroom was silent. The HOA president's smug smile disappeared. Her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The confident voice that had declared my land abandoned trembled for the first time when she whispered to her lawyer. The judge leaned forward, voice cutting through the silence. Since when does an HOA own land it never purchased or was assigned? These documents show clearly that the land never left the original owner's possession. Neighbors who had come to testify earlier watched wide-eyed. Residents who had believed the HOA's lies realized the truth. Phones were out again, quietly recording. The weight of exposure settled over the room like a heavy curtain. The HOA tried one last maneuver. Their lawyer argued that the community's infrastructure, roads, utilities, homes, should be considered in deciding ownership. He claimed that undoing it would harm innocent parties. But the judge shook his head. Property rights cannot be erased by convenience or deceit. Investment does not create ownership where none exists. The HOA president's face went pale. She whispered, almost inaudibly, "This can't be happening." But it was. Every lie she had told, every document she had faked, every neighbor she had manipulated, it was unraveling before her eyes. Even more shocking, the county confirmed that one of the signatures on their HOA permit applications did not match any authorized official, revealing intentional forgery. The courtroom murmured. People gasped. Cameras flashed. The evidence was damning. At that moment, the twist fully landed. The HOA had built an entire society on land they had no legal right to claim. They had manipulated residents, ignored law, and assumed that my absence equaled surrender. But every forged document, every lie, every smirk, they were about to be exposed. The judge took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch. Then, in a tone that made it clear this wasn't just a legal decision, it was a moral judgment, he said. This court finds that the HOA's claims of ownership are null and void. The land remains the property of the rightful owner. Any infrastructure or development built without consent is considered an encroachment and subject to removal or restitution at the owner's discretion. Gasps echoed. The HOA president's shoulders slumped. Her lawyer frantically whispered something, but no words could undo the humiliation. Neighbors who had previously looked uneasy now stared with awe and disbelief. Some began whispering about how they had been misled. It was the moment of reckoning. I remained calm, letting the court's words sink in. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth, long buried, but finally recognized. Outside the courtroom, whispers turned into conversations. Some neighbors approached me, shaking their heads in disbelief, apologizing for believing the HOA's lies. The story I had feared would be a lonely fight had become a public vindication. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself a quiet smile. The twist had not just revealed who truly owned the land, it revealed the extent of the HOA's deception, the fragility of their assumed power, and the power of persistence, evidence, and truth. 2 years of absence, 2 years of quiet preparation, and every document in my folder had turned the tables completely. The HOA had assumed I would never return. They had assumed I would never fight. They had assumed truth could be silenced. They were wrong. The twist didn't just change the case, it changed the course of my life, the perception of my neighbors, and the fate of a community built on lies. And in that moment, I knew justice wasn't delayed, it was inevitable. The courtroom felt heavier than ever that day, charged with the tension of truth finally catching up to lies. The HOA sat stiff, their faces pale, whispers bouncing between the lawyer and the president like a desperate strategy. They had assumed control for so long that the thought of losing it now seemed impossible to them. But the evidence, the original deeds, the tax records, the county correspondence, was undeniable. Every document was a nail in the coffin of their false ownership. The judge's gavel hit the desk. Silence. He began reading aloud the findings of the county and the cross-verified documentation, detailing how the HOA had knowingly submitted falsified permits, misrepresented county approvals, and claimed my land as abandoned despite my continuous legal ownership. Each sentence was a blow to the HOA's arrogance, each word an unmasking of the public deceit they had orchestrated. The HOA president's hands trembled as she clutched her notes. Her lawyer's confident tone had vanished, replaced by frantic whispers and hurried attempts to find loopholes. But the court had none. Every attempt to delay, to mislead, to manipulate, was neutralized by the unshakable evidence I had brought. The judge then addressed the residents who had invested in the HOA's constructions. His words were measured but firm. While investment in infrastructure shows intent, it does not override ownership rights. The land was never legally transferred to the HOA. Any development done without proper consent is considered an encroachment. Remedies must follow the law, not convenience. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some residents covered their mouths in shock. Others turned toward the HOA president, realization dawning that they had been misled. Cameras flashed from phones and reporters taking notes from the courtroom balcony, capturing every moment of this unraveling. Then came the most satisfying part. The judge issued a final verdict, the HOA's claims of ownership were completely invalid. The community they had built on my land was constructed without legal authority, rendering all permits and developments null. The court ordered the HOA to cease operations on the property, remove any encroaching structures, and compensate for the misuse of land, while making public acknowledgments of their wrongdoing. The HOA president froze. Her confident posture collapsed, shoulders slumping, lips pressed tight in disbelief. Her lawyer whispered something, probably a last-ditch plea, but the judge silenced him with a glare. Every attempt at defense had been dismantled. The courtroom had shifted completely. Now, all eyes were on the HOA, their lies laid bare. Outside, neighbors whispered and some approached me cautiously. "We didn't know," one admitted. Another simply shook his head, eyes wide. The power the HOA had wielded for months evaporated in an instant, replaced by public shame. Their so-called authority, their carefully constructed image of control, was gone. I stood quietly, absorbing the weight of it all. No shouting, no dramatic gestures, just the calm certainty of justice. Every paper, every piece of evidence I had preserved, every quiet preparation I had made over 2 years had led to this moment. The society they thought was untouchable was, in reality, built on lies, and now those lies had been exposed for the world to see. The judge delivered one last line before adjourning. "Power does not replace law. Lies cannot create ownership. Justice must be served, and it has been today." The gavel struck one final time. The echo lingered like a declaration. The HOA had lost everything: authority, credibility, and public trust. The community they had tried to manipulate now knew the truth. And I, standing on the land that was always mine, felt a calm satisfaction that was far stronger than any anger or revenge could have been. It wasn't just about the land. It was about respect, identity, and the principle that no one, no organization, could assume power over truth. They had believed my absence meant surrender. They had believed they could manipulate reality and silence ownership with smirks and forged documents. They were wrong. The courtroom emptied slowly, but the lessons remained. Residents whispered among themselves, reporters typed furiously, and the HOA president left with the weight of public humiliation pressing on her shoulders. I walked out last, my steps steady, surveying the land that had been threatened, encroached upon, and almost stolen. Yet now, every inch of it stood as a testament to perseverance, preparation, and the unstoppable force of truth. The power they had thought was untouchable was gone. The deception, once so carefully crafted, had been dismantled. The land was mine again, not just in legal terms, but in every sense that mattered. That day, the HOA learned that arrogance and deceit can never survive the light of truth. And I learned that absence may delay confrontation, but it cannot erase justice. I had returned. I had fought. And I had won. With the gavel's final strike, my land was officially restored. The HOA's authority crumbled, their influence over the community shattered. The society they had built on lies was now exposed as nothing more than a fragile illusion. Streets, homes, and gates that had once symbolized their power now stood as reminders of their deception. Neighbors approached cautiously, some apologizing for believing the HOA, others simply shaking their heads in disbelief. But the most important truth was clear: ownership, rights, and justice cannot be overridden by lies or intimidation. I walked across the familiar dirt paths, touching the grass, surveying the land I had fought to reclaim. Every corner, every tree, every inch belonged to me, not because I had fought aggressively, but because I had stayed prepared, kept my records, and trusted that truth, no matter how long buried, would eventually rise. This victory wasn't just personal, it was a warning. HOA overreach, lies, and abuse of power can be challenged. With patience, evidence, and persistence, justice can prevail even against the most confident opponents. As I looked out over my restored land, I knew one thing for certain. They built an entire society on my property, thinking I would never return. But truth cannot be erased. And justice always finds a way.